I'm Diane Small, Director of RIBA London, and today's Practice Clinics is all about planning application success. And we are pleased to have Karolina join us and also Nyemu join us. So I'd like for our guest speakers to introduce themselves, starting with Karolina.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on here with all of you today. My name is Karolina Hall. I am a Development Management Officer for Enfield Council with several years experience working in London. I'm also a public practice associate. I spent the lion's share of my career actually in New York, working for the city of New York in sort of a similar DM, but other areas of planning as well. And most recently, I've started a little project called Pinch Yourself, You're a Planner, to kind of celebrate being a planner. And I think you could equally pinch yourself for being architects. But if you want to check that out, that's pyyap.com. And I'll pass it over to Nyemu.
Thanks, Karolina.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Nyemu Holness. I'm a Regeneration Manager working for London Borough of Lambeth. My career basically started off as a Part 1 architect, and I transitioned over to the other side and became a planner following that. So I started off in development management, previously known as development control. And I've also worked on policy as an urban designer and as a policy planner as well. So, and now currently working in regeneration, which is mainly working on the procurement and delivery of mixed use schemes in Lambeth, and also identifying budgets for various strategies in Lambeth.
Thanks, Nyemu. Once again, Practice Clinics is an interactive experience. So if you do have a question, I'd like you to put the question in the chat. We didn't get as many questions on sign up. So we will be looking for you to contribute to the conversation. And I'd like to thank our sponsors, Ibstock Brick, for sponsoring the Practice Clinic series for this year. So thank you, Ibstock. So as we don't have any questions at the moment, I have a question for you, each of you. And I'd like to start with Nyemu first of all, and then pass it over to Karolina. My question is, what does planning application success look like?
Yeah, really good question. So I have worked on the client side and also from the local authority side of planning. And I guess it's different depending on which side you're coming from. I think for a client, what they want is, at the end of the day, is a smooth process going through the planning process. So depending on the scale of the development, they want to go through a smooth pre-app process. They want to work collaboratively with planners, and at the end of the day to get approval. So that would be success. I think from the other side, which Karolina will probably be able to talk more on, it is also about getting a successful planning approval, but it's also about the process being small and getting the right information from the start. So that would be, in short, what I think a successful planning application would look like.
Thanks, Nyemu. Karolina, do you want to add to that?
Sure. I agree with everything Nyemu said. Absolutely, that there is certainly the kind of the world on both sides of a planning application. I think it's also really important for an architect, for the planning agent, for all of the officers who sit on the planning authority side, to think also about kind of the ultimate goal for the project itself, and kind of thinking beyond the application, because ultimately there is a goal, there is a vision for what that application is going to deliver. And chances are that, and I apologize, first of all, my voice is terrible because I'm recovering from a cold, so I annoying myself. So I apologize for that. But I think, yeah, if you stand back kind of at the start of the process and you think about what is sort of the ultimate goal for my client, or what would the planning officer like to see, chances are that those objectives are really aligned. And I think what's refreshing when you come into an application is when you first approach whether it's a local planning authority, and if you have the benefit of having that conversation with planning officers, is to kind of agree what that objective is and to say this is ultimately what we want, and we understand that along the way we may not agree on sort of the right all the ingredients or how much weight to the different facets of the application are that they will sort of take. But certainly I think it's great to stand back and sort of see the big picture and to agree and to sort of appreciate that chances are everyone's working towards the same thing. And that certainly is very appreciated. And it helps planners, certainly, again, planners, and you're busy, we're busy. It helps all of us to sort of appreciate that that there is a bigger picture beyond what's on the application form.
Great, thank you. We've just got a message from Timothy Watts, and a question from Tracy. And Tracy asks, Timothy, we're going to go back to your comment. I think everyone agrees with your comment, actually. And then maybe we can get Karolina to explain a bit more about public practice and the idea to get more architects into places like planning offices. But let's kind of deal with Tracy's question first of all. And Tracy asks, what approach would the panel advise where LPAs have stopped offering pre-app advice?
Yeah,
that's a really hard one. I mean, I fortunately I haven't worked in an LPA that has stopped offering pre-app advice, and I think as Timothy points out, it is an issue of resource, and as Diane began to already say, that they're and we're all aware of this issue, and that's kind of that is sort of what spurred me to kind of remind people why planners are needed and valuable, as there does need to be more planner resource, and planners appreciate that experience as well of having pre-apps. And I'm glad that there is an appetite among this group, and that you recognize the value of pre-apps. Maybe Nyemu, you have some thoughts on kind of what are optional sort of replacements for that advice?
I mean, yeah, it's the same as where I work at Lambeth. We're very fortunate. We still do give pre-app advice, but like everywhere, I think across London and the UK, there is a shortage of experienced planners and planners in general. So getting that advice from planners, you tend to be in quite a long waiting list, or it just takes a really long time to get that advice. I think we are where we are, and this in terms of resources are stretched. So I would advise that architects really go back to the principles of understanding policy. So a planner will start off looking at the national planning policy framework, which sets out the framework for development across England. And then they will look at, if it's in London, they'll look at the London plan, which again sets out policy framework for London. And then they will then look into their local policies and any other supplementary planning guidance or supporting planning material will be used as a material consideration. So I think for architects, about kind of like understanding the framework, the policy framework that your project sits within, understanding land uses, understanding what we'll be looking for, which is quality architecture, looking at the site, the context. So really have a strong analysis of your site and its context, and also the people, the demographic, especially, you know, I think that's kind of forgotten even just for some of the smaller schemes. You know, what is the purpose? What are you trying to provide? What targets will it meet that the council is trying to achieve? And as Karolina mentioned before, you know, what are the main objectives of your project? And do these objectives meet with the aspiration and objectives of the local authority? And then once you've kind of worked that out, think about, you know, impacts. You know, the NPPF talks about design being at the heart of development, sustainability, really thinking through all of that. And then, you know, at the end of your project, really going through the policies to understand what are the impacts that it has. So almost doing a mini equalities impact assessment for your project. And hopefully, you know, you can go back and see how it aligns with the policy and how the impacts are positive. And, you know, you're using good quality materials that sit comfortably in the context of the development as well. So thinking about the character of the area, etc. And yeah, I think that would be my starting point for kind of like the thought process. And always, you know, I remember when I used to sit as an urban designer, I would always go back to the architect and say, the first question would be, talk me through your design process. What was your thought process? Because then if you think about your design process and why you're doing what you're doing, you usually kind of come, you know, you will come and you will start to unpick some of the challenges or the issues that a planning officer is raising.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Just on the point about walking through and the evolution of the design, I think is really, it helps for the officer. It really helps not only to kind of understand the scheme and to kind of take that to form the consideration around the design itself, but it also helps to form a lot of consideration around a lot of other factors related to the scheme. I mean, if the housing provision is based on site constraints, then walking through the options that that were explored in order to maximize that site, in order to meet other areas of policy, if you kind of walk through very clearly, step by step, the process that you went through, that's enormously helpful and effectively kind of helps the officer to devise a consideration and write the report. And then again, it's for if you go to committee, it's absolutely brilliant for the purposes of committee and giving the officer the information that's needed. And just on the point again about, because I feel badly to say, oh, I think Nyemu's advice about making sure that you kind of have a solid understanding of the planning of the policy framework. I think that's really right. If you don't have an officer to rely on for pre-app, I think that's exactly right. But I think it's also important, express to your local planning authority that you really want the pre-app, and remind them that it's a source of income for them. And unfortunately, it's a vicious cycle of, if you don't have the planners, you don't have the pre-apps, you're not earning the money. So you have to offer the service to then earn the income and have the resource to hire the planners. So if express to them that there is a demand, and that's really helpful. It's really good to know, to hear.
Thanks, Karolina. Before we go into into the next question, there's a couple in the chat. Thanks for everyone for being so active in the chats. Obviously, some of the questions we're not going to be able to answer, but we'll try and answer all of them. But before I go to some of the questions, I just kind of had this, can you give us like what happens inside a planning office? Because as architects, we don't get to see that. What are the conversations, if you can kind of give us the inside scoop of like some of the conversations which would actually help us to kind of get success in planning applications? It's a
Mhm.
slightly different question to the one before, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Tell us what we don't know and what's being said about us.
I can start, Nyemu, if you're comfortable with that.
I think it's better for you to go because you do it
Yeah.
day to day. This is what,
Yeah, I love
100%.
this question, and this is one I've been really keen for people to get insight into this, and certainly counselors as well, to kind of understand what the process is. I think that more people, the more kind of transparent we are about the process, the easier it is for all of us to work together and for it to be a successful process. So when a planning application comes in, and sometimes that will come in the form of a pre-app rather than an application. But if you don't have an opportunity for an application, or it's a small scheme and you just want to submit, obviously there's the statutory time frame within which an application needs to be determined, and the application will go out to consultees for some amount of time, and typically that's 21 days. Those consultees will be internal consultees and external consultees. So the officer, the case officer, and I'm a case officer. I like to think of my job as being kind of the communications manager, and that's a really big part of it, is making sure that the information is shared, is understood, and then that information is then kind of more than collated, but that information is gathered and works together. So the consultees will have time to respond to the application package and formulate their comments and submit those comments back. And it's up to the case officer to review all of those comments, make sure that, again, that the various relevant areas of policy are being addressed, and that there are no conflicts among those comments. Sometimes the comments will identify issues. It's up to the case officer to notify the applicant, obviously urgently, if there are any significant issues. And then that becomes the foundation for the officer's consideration of the application. Consultees, internal consultees will be whether the local authority or whether the council has SUDS officers, I imagine they would, has a heritage officer, those will be the kind of the transportation officers, those will be the internal consultees. Otherwise, the external consultees will be the major agencies, so the Environment Agency, Homes England, et cetera, depending on the substance of the application. It sounds, when I describe it that way, it sounds sort of very linear and very simple. But there is a lot to sort of manage in that process. So there are obviously lots of conversations that happen internally amongst council officers related to an application, depending on the sort of comments that come in. And then if necessary, we will organize meetings with external agencies and applicants and make sure that everybody's included in that.
Thanks. Naomi, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Karolina's covered that quite well.
Okay.
I did want to. There was a question in the chat, or did you want to come to that later, Dan?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. There was a question from Richard.
Yeah.
Dziecki, I think. And I think it was a really good question about, should architects start thinking about employing planners within their practices? And I remember when I first started, when I finished my part one, I actually went and worked in an architectural practice that had a planner. And that's what actually gave me the idea of, oh, maybe I want to be a planner instead of an architect.
Why?
Well, the main reason, when I was first finished, when I did my degree, I was stuck in an office basically just doing CAD drawings for just commercial development. And I just thought architecture was going to be a bit more, naively, I thought it was going to be a bit more exciting. And then I realized that a lot of my work I was doing was for a client, and I really wanted to be more impactful in design places and spaces for people and communities. And I was very aware of the fact that, you know, the people that were designing these spaces were living in some of the spaces that I wanted to see change in, especially in London. And I was raised in South London, so it was all about seeing that change. And so I paused. I literally decided, I changed. I was like, oh, I'm going to have a career change. And I wrote to a whole load of planning consultancies. And yeah, it was quite hard. Long story short, they didn't want me because I didn't have experience. Then I offered to work for free. I offered a local authority free work, and they said, we'll find you a job. Long story short, it wasn't quite that short, but yeah, that's how I flipped over. So yeah, I really do think I think yeah, it would be it would be beneficial to have planners working with you, because you'd be working with them from concept, you know, right through to feasibility to delivery. And a lot of the schemes that I work on now, they're large schemes, but what we do is we work on concept and feasibility designs with architects to work up, you know, like how many houses can you get, and you know, what's the best development for the site. So this is all concept and feasibility work. And then as the local authority, I take that scheme to our planners, and I go through I go through what an architect would go through, a pre-app process to understand policy, make sure everything's aligned, is understanding viability, you know, everything around the scheme. And then we put out the sites that we're looking at, we put them out to market. So, I mean, it is a bit different. It is about procurement, but I think that the fact that we have myself as like an in-house planner working with our proper local authority planners. I say proper, but I mean as in they are professionally, that you know, working with people like Karolina, professionals like Karolina, to advise myself. And then I go back and say to the developer or to an architect, yes, this scheme is a viable scheme. And on top of that, I give them comfort that it's likely to be looked upon favorably by the local authority, and subject to more work, it is likely to be developed and be deliverable. So
it sounds like there's a lot. It's like a chain of communication, and you all have to kind of be singing from the same song sheet from the start. So I'm just trying to think, what else can architects do to make that chain of communication smoother, but also the process of communication? Because I realize that with architecture, like, design is very personal and emotional, so they are kind of like emotionally attached to their project, so they're only seeing things from their perspective as much as we try and see it from other professionals' perspective. Sometimes we get kind of just tunnel vision because it's our creation. Other people are coming into it once we're kind of conceptualizing it and developing it. What communication skills could architects kind of think of putting in the forefront when dealing with the planning process in order to get their vision understood, but also to get the needs of the planner, get that balance right?
Yeah, I think the point that was made earlier about demonstrating the evolution of a design is a really, really important one in terms of communication. And then another thing is just tying to the conversation that we were just having about should there be planners working within architectural firms? And I'm just curious for the group, how often you work with planning agents to submit planning applications, and how often you're relied on to sort of to fill both shoes, to be the planning agent and the architect, because that certainly changes the dynamic of kind of you as applicant and your role in the your role. And this may be kind of an unfounded assumption, but just on based on what I've observed is applications that come in with a planning agent and an architect, and the architect will often be, you know, working very, very closely, sitting side by side with the planning agent and facing planning officers equally as a planning agent. I think that that's a really fortunate position to be in, and one that I would use in terms of communication, because I was just reflecting kind of, or in preparation for the session yesterday, I remembered an instance where I was working, this happened to be in New York, but I was working on a high profile scheme and was working with quite a difficult applicant. And the agent, in order to sort of hold the line, was equally difficult and presented themselves as equally sort of kind of sticking to their guns. And in that instance, the architect was a tremendous, wonderful architect, but at the same time used that position to be a really terrific mediator and to kind of keep ears open to the comments and what was being said, and to sort of very softly and gently say, well, how about, you know, I hear what you're saying and what you're saying. How about we kind of view this issue in this way? And I thought that was, in that instance, that worked really successfully. And I think that there is room for architects to have that role, is to kind of to listen to the comments. None of them are personal. None of them are you know, a kind of reflection on the kind of the work, or intending to sort of be a direct kind of criticism of the work. Normally, you have to kind of step back and appreciate that, you know, that ultimately there is a balanced view that needs to be taken, and so it's going to consider lots of factors. But I think that architects, when they're certainly on bigger applicant teams, are in a really, really privileged position, because you get to be there and sort of and kind of help to balance the comments out, whereas the planning agent may not always be in that position or be willing to have that position. So I think that comes as a real benefit certainly to planners.
Thanks, Karolina. We've just got a question here from Ali, and they ask, can you give stories of small projects that were able to produce a big impact from the POV of planning objectives? Anyone can think of that, or should we go on to the next one and let that kind of, we'll come back to that question once you've had a thought. I'm just looking at some of the comments here, and it really is about the planning department being understaffed. And there's not much that we can kind of say or do to kind of change that in this conversation. But like, I don't know if you've covered it already. Is there any way architects can either, what can we do to support the planning kind of industry, the fact that it's being understaffed? You know, is it the case that, okay, we might think, okay, maybe I might take a career break from architecture and go into planning for a bit? This is just me and my naivety. Or how can we kind of, is there any part of the work that we could do in parallel with a planning officer? I don't know. I'm just coming up with ideas.
Yeah. I mean, I love the idea of people switching careers over to planning, and yeah, I was listening to a podcast the other day about planning dream team, and it's true, you know, for managers who've managed big planning teams, and have sort of done very well in their careers, having a multidisciplinary team is terrific, and people who come from all walks, not necessarily who are trained as planners. So I absolutely love that. I think the main thing, you know, architects often are, well, you are the source of information, right? All the information that feeds into the application begins with you. So whether it's a small application or a large one, consistency is so important. Just making sure, because planning agent, sorry, I shouldn't make judgments about planning agents, because they are equally fellow planners. But just making sure that the numbers are consistent across the documents and all the, I mean, I know that it's not your responsibility to review the technical reports and things, but just making sure that that's shared consistently, making sure that information is clear and simple. And I think Nyemu made the point earlier about planning policy. If you have a strong handle on the planning policy and just setting out how that planning policy is being met, using simple language, clear language, just taking us through the kind of the logical stream. Simplicity is really, really key. Simplicity is key, and yeah, just making the point as kind of efficiently and in a way that planners will be able to identify. And it's not, I don't mean to make it sound as though it's a tick box exercise. It's not by any means, but just clearly and concisely, that helps. And I mean, arguably it helps cut down on time and resource.
And we've just got, I mean, Sarah, I feel your frustration as well. I mean, Sarah's kind of put, it's more of a question of what can be done about delays at large, so we don't feel so powerless. And it's a really awful situation to be in. And it's not just London, it is across the UK.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard because every planner that I speak to is telling me that they're burnt out. Like, honestly, they've got so many applications that they're dealing with. And I don't really have a proper answer to your question, Sarah. I guess it would be just maybe in your programming for, delivery of a scheme or for the design process that you'd have to like add in a few more weeks, like the statutory time for sorry, Karolina, you may have to correct me on this, but for the minor schemes is like 8 weeks, and for the majors is 13 weeks, and we know that they're not meeting that. So it would really be about like being very aware of that, I suppose, and making sure that your client is aware of that and putting in the extra time within your program to accommodate that.
So it seems like the issue is ultimately with the planning profession. Either, and it just, to me, it seems like not many people are choosing to be planners.
Exactly.
I'm not assuming that it's actually, they're fully staffed and just not doing the work. It's a sense, I'm getting a sense of that the planning departments are understaffed in relation to the work that's coming in. So that maybe is an issue for the Institute of Planning to look at in terms of where are their graduates going?
Definitely. Yeah. There used to be a big push for planners back in the 90s, and that kind of, in fact, at one point we were even looking at going to Australia, I think, to recruit in the early 2000s, if I remember correctly. So yeah, there's always been this kind of these moments where we think, oh, we need more planners, and then it dies down, and I guess they just recruit enough from overseas or wherever. So there used to be a time where we had loads of Australians and New Zealanders as planners to kind of, meet the demand. And there's a lot less, like there's hardly any Australians or New Zealanders anymore. So yeah, we may have to start recruiting from outside. And
Just question, did you think like it may be a result of Brexit? I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean,
I haven't asked actually. Maybe you know, Karolina.
Well, I don't know that, having spoken to a planner from New Zealand not that long ago, there had been, like you say, there had been sort of a push, and there were certain, I know that when I'm speaking from absolute ignorance, but there had been a list of professions that kind of were viewed as being more preferential for giving out visas or kind of longer stay, and planning had been on that list for a long time, and then it effectively sort of timed out. I don't know whether it was because it was seen as there being enough or for whatever reason, but someone recently pointed out to me, she'd seen figures that the numbers of planners coming out of school graduating hasn't gone down, but the numbers of planners going into local authorities has receded. And so then there is a question as to whether more are going into into private practice, and now there's a lot of pressure. Planners certainly in planning authorities are under enormous pressure for lots of reasons. A lot of them tied to sort of the way planning is measured in sort of quantity rather than necessarily quality, and there's a desire to see a move away from that, but that this is very much a a debate for or a whole other debate as to how we attract more planners into local authorities. But there is certainly a pressure and like you point out, a staffing issue.
Yeah. And I think to Timothy Watt's question around privatization, like building control, this has started. I think in Hillingdon, there is a organization or company, I think, called TerraQuest, who employ planners to meet the demand for, I think, for Hillingdon. Please don't quote me on that, because I know it was for a borough, for a local authority. Sorry, I wouldn't say Hillingdon. So that is starting to happen. So maybe other local authorities will start to do the same.
Interesting. It would have been really useful to get some kind of like, not real planners, because you both are real planners on the call as well, but we have to be kind of sensitive and respectful, because we don't want to seem like we're kind of ganging up on them. But I think some of the answers you're giving are questions that we could take away and digest, and maybe see if we can come up with some solutions. I think there really needs to be a conversation with RIBA and the Planning Institute to see how we can kind of both support each other, because at the end of the day, we're all in this building profession, so we all need to kind of work together to get the job done. I'm looking at the chat again, and just thank you to everyone for being so vocal and active in the chat. It's really interesting, and it gives us some different kind of angles in which to approach your conversations. And Tracy, hold on. Yeah, so Tracy has just commented that it's difficult as a PO from overseas to be parachuted in to have a good enough understanding of the policy in detail. And she had project burnout by that in the 90s. So, I was thinking that the same thing, aren't the planning policies in one country different from another, and how, what's the time frame in which you need to get up to speed to have a really authentic analysis of the project that's in front of you in the UK?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, and Karolina probably would be able to answer this better, coming from, New York, because I know that as a planning officer, we cannot just go and work in the UK, in the US. We have to do some kind of translation of our planning law to your American style, I think, as far as I'm aware. But we can't just go and say I'm a planner in the UK, I'm qualified. I'd like to start working on projects in New York. So it'll be interesting to hear from you what you think. How's it been for you?
Well, it's hard. I wouldn't be able to say whether it's easier to go from London to New York or New York to London. I think you pointed out that in the kind of early 2000s, there were lots of planners coming over from Australia, New Zealand here, and somebody pointed out, when I came over just 5 years ago, a manager pointed out to me that on the whole, that successfully filled that gap, that period. There was nothing. I mean, from my personal experience, there was nothing preventing me from coming over here and working as a planner, so long as I demonstrated that I had the skills. And then it is certainly a matter of learning the local policy and the procedures, and that comes with on the job experience. So if you're fortunate to work with a good team and a manager who's prepared to give you the kind of the benefit of the doubt, and you're keen to pick it up quickly, then that's something that's very, very doable. I mean, at the moment, I know in Enfield, we are just a few weeks ago began an apprenticeship program. And that the point of that is certainly to sort of grow our own, is that, and lots of planners have come through an apprenticeship program. And that's to, the offer is to pay for education while the student gets the work experience, and then that's sort of caveated with an obligation to stay on at the local authority for some amount of time afterwards. And the group that's come in are terrific, really, really enthusiastic, very happy to learn. And that's certainly one way to kind of get those graduate level and entry level planners into work, and to give them that additional sort of benefit of helping them cover their educational costs. What happens afterwards? I mean, I think that there is a whole lot of work, and maybe that's something that sort of through my pinch yourself work at some point, is something that I'll be sort of interested to explore, is to kind of understand, to pick apart a little bit better, understand the numbers behind the kind of army of planners that's out there right now, and where they're coming from, how long they're staying, and what happens when they reach that sort of senior principal level, because I think that that's really where the drop off is, where either it's burnout or people take early retirement or move to different careers. It hasn't been documented, and it's not known. I mean, it's certainly being reflected in the chat here that it is an area of frustration, that there is an undersourcing of planners, and I think local authorities are really trying to find all ways to kind of supplement that. Again, there's a move to digitization, whether it's just the submission of applications and validation, or more of the substantive aspects of planning applications, and we could debate that as well, whether planning applications should be considered via sort of more online or digitalized tools. That too is something that I'd be interested to kind of get views on from people here. But there are different ways that are being looked at to tackle the issue.
Thanks. Just responding to Tracy's comment, and yes, there is a special interest group for planning at the RIBA now. Unfortunately, no one from the group was able to attend this session. It would have been good to have them on this session. So maybe perhaps, because this is such a heated topic, and not just in London, all over the UK, perhaps we can get do another practice clinic specifically on planning, and maybe invite some of the key kind of key stakeholders in this conversation to have a more thorough conversation. Not to say that you guys are not, I think you're doing a great job, and you really are holding your own and being kind of fair to both architects and planners, but I think more voices in the conversation could be really useful. And again, thanks to everybody for your comments. So
I think Toby asks a really good question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, demonstrating regeneration benefits to wider community as part of satisfying planning requirements other than streets and wayfinding signage. And that, yes, those are definitely up there. What else would be suggested? Maybe Nyemu, seeing as you have with your regeneration hat.
Sure. So obviously, like you mentioned, it's specific to each site and the context of the development. I think I'll just give you some examples of some of the schemes that I've worked on and what I've asked for. So you mentioned, I think you said a community, did you have a community-led scheme? So for our community-led schemes, for example, we would be asking for you to demonstrate whether you know, what will you be providing, and what will be the benefits for the community that you're developing a scheme for. So those benefits could be, are you providing jobs? Were you providing any skills or training facilities? The big kind of asks that we asked for like maybe a housing-led scheme, or I'll just say I had a mixed-use scheme. So the big asks were, will you be, you know, there's a need for affordable housing. So how much affordable housing will be provided within the scheme? There was a need for creation of jobs. So the commercial spaces, will you be creating new jobs and opportunities for new jobs? Will the workspaces again be affordable? It would be about carbon zero. Is your development carbon zero? What the benefits that will bring? So is your development sustainable as well? Will there be creation of new connections, pedestrian routes, cycle routes? As you mentioned, you know, street trees. So what greening will you be providing? What kind of soft landscaping? I'm just trying to think of any more. There was actually a scheme where we were asking for real benefits. We understood that the communities in Brixton, for example, there was high levels of unemployment amongst the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities. So we actually had, as part of their workspace strategy, they they demonstrated that they would provide benefits in having focused initiatives that would actually focus for certain groups. So I think in order for you to kind of really demonstrate the benefits that you're bringing through your development, you really need to understand the context. So you need to understand the place and the people, because if you start off by what is happening now, currently, what is the need, then you can work out how your project can potentially provide benefits for the need. And then also going back to policy aspiration objectives, usually it's embedded in that anyway. So all of the policy is informed by evidence-based studies. So we understand how much what our housing targets are because it's informed by current situations and projections. We understand how many jobs we're going to need because we understand how much commercial workspace we have, what the condition of it is, and what's going to be required in the future. So I don't know, I hope that gives you a bit of an understanding.
Yeah, it does. It seems like, I think it might be a case of we think it as them and us, but maybe it should be a we, and then hopefully that will kind of create some momentum for the end result. Don't know if that just made sense then. There was a question, something that came to my mind. Oh, yeah, the question I had was, how long would it take to, say if you were an architect, to kind of get yourself up to speed, whether it's requalify or whatever, to be useful in the planning department to kind of help with this backlog, because that's essentially what it is, a backlog. I mean, Karolina, you're in the planning office via public practice. Is that kind of a fast way in, or is there another way in which kind of architects can retrain as planners so that we can kind of help with the backlog, and not necessarily, you know, down tools, I'm an architect and I'm a planner today, but maybe there's that, you know, planner architect or something. I don't know. Just trying to find solutions.
Yeah. I think the answer can be today, if you want it to be. I think you can, you know, I mean, again, this we could debate what makes a planner, whether you need 1 day of experience or 10 years of experience. But you know, you talked about public practice. I mean, I went to public practice and was placed in Enfield for reasons sort of specific to my my career circumstances, and I wanted to participate in public practice itself, I could have equally applied directly to Enfield Council for this job, and hopefully would have gotten it. So that's, that's certainly one way, and I think just some sort of inside intelligence. Public practice is actively looking for people to apply for development management positions. There's a demand from local authorities, but not enough people applying for that role, probably because public practices may be seen, and I think this is probably more historic than recent, because now it is very multidisciplinary. Look for built environment professionals from all kinds of backgrounds, but it's sort of been historically seen as being very much a design focused kind of program, and that's no longer the case. But there is a shortage of people looking for DM roles. But if an architect was to approach public practice and say, I'd like to try DM for a year, 2 years, then that would, from what I understand, that would certainly be welcomed. Equally, if you wanted to try your chance, try applying to a DM role, there are loads of them out there. I think as an architect, you already have kind of, that sensibility that you need, and the makings of a planner. So I think that there is definitely potential there to fill that gap in that way. Like I said, from my own experience, I had to kind of develop an understanding of the policies and procedures, and that's something you can only do on the job. So I would encourage anyone to try to do it.
I think
sounds like an interesting choice. Go ahead, Nyemu.
Sorry to interrupt. I mean, it was just really just to add that I think it depends on the local authority as well. I mean, my route was coming from architecture. However, I was made very well aware that I had gaps in my knowledge when it came to planning. And so the route that I took was I did a master's in planning policy and practice. But I was really lucky that the local authority paid for me to do that master's. And I think that's partially one of the reasons why we probably do have a shortage of planners, because back then the local authorities had the resources to, to help you get that qualification, because we know that to be a chartered planner, you have to have, an accredited degree. Or you can take the, I think it's the associate planner route, where you can become, RTPI chartered planner. So yeah, it depends. It depends what you want to get out of it, whether you want to become a chartered planner or you just want to get that experience of being a planner. And then, you could become a chartered planner after you've got a certain amount of experience as well.
I'm just going back to the chat, and again, thank you guys for being so active on here. I'm just going to see if we can run through some of the questions as we are approaching 5 o'clock. So we've probably got about another 15-20 minutes. I actually didn't think we would be this busy, but this is great. So Nicola F asks, what recourse do architects have if there's a rogue senior officer at the planning department and the architects in an area have difficulties with? So, okay, the architect and the senior planning officers do not get along. If you complain to the local authority, how do you know that you won't get blacklisted?
I'm not aware of any blacklist maintained.
No, me neither.
I don't think that sort of a historic experience should necessarily influence what happens going forward. So I'd be very disappointed to think that there is sort of some catalog of people with applicants with bad reputations that are treated any differently than anyone else. So
right,
I certainly wouldn't be
take it project by project.
Yeah, I'll certainly take it project by project. And again, it's never personal. It should never be personal, as long as communication is kept open and clear, then there shouldn't be an issue.
Thanks. And Richard says, should we lobby the local councillors or use a PR firm to publicise the large schemes? I see this done by a number of practices. Does this work for you as a planner, or do you not like this?
So I think that, sorry, Nyemu, if you don't mind, I'll just for your first few thoughts. So I think that this was a point I wanted to bring up earlier in terms of planning application success, and it does depend on the scale of application you're working on. And I think it's really interesting that Richard has framed it sort of in a PR way, but something that really helps application success is engagement, and sincere, true, honest engagement. And whether it is done by I mean, if you want, PR firms sometimes do offer this, communications firms offer this, but if it is looked upon very favorably to demonstrate engagement before an application is lodged, not once it's necessarily goes in, but if you show that there has been engagement and true consultation with the local community and stakeholders, then that certainly helps an application a great deal. I think for small schemes, and this is coming from someone who recently had a neighbor submit a planning application, neighbor who's next door, and could have very well knocked on our door with a bottle of wine and just said, this is what's happening, but didn't do that. That also goes a long way for very small schemes, is to just encourage your clients to reach out to their neighbor, offer even a meeting between you as designer and the neighbor, and it's going to go so much better than something being dropped on someone, and when it is their home, and personal feelings get in the mix very quickly. But definitely some form of outreach to people who'll be affected. But I certainly wouldn't see it as being that is very separate from lobbying campaigns or kind of strictly PR visibility campaigns, because that planners won't be interested in that. But sincere and consultation is great.
Thanks. Nyemu, do you have anything to add on that? And then I'm going to go back to Carlos's question. Sorry, Carlos, I forgot.
No, I just really echo what Karolina is saying. That you'll be surprised at how, if you can gain the support of when you do meaningful consultation, you're doing the whole local community, including maybe different landowners, that will actually really support your scheme, and they will probably go to their local councillors and MPs lobbying it for you. So, yeah.
Thank you. Actually, we were talking about the other day, I was talking with some friends about, like, a lot of practices now are collaborating with other smaller practices to get on design frameworks and stuff like that. And it was mentioned that a lot of planners are seeing that sometimes it is just to meet the diversity quota and not actually everyone's working in collaboration. How can practices kind of really authentically and genuinely show to the planning officers that this is a kind of shared team project, rather than you're just tagging along because you make us look good? And then after that question, we'll go to Carlos's question.
Sure, I'll try and answer that quite quickly. For us on our schemes, it depends. If it's a design team that's bidding for a project, we have an evaluation criteria that is set out, quality and price, 70% quality, and within that quality, we have started to integrate equalities, diversity, and inclusion. And with equalities, diversity, and inclusion, if it is really true, meaningful equalities, diversity, and inclusion, you will see that embedded throughout the design process. So you will see it within the actual project itself, the project team, and right through to like the suppliers. It will be embedded throughout. So that's how we know that it's not tokenistic. So, like, for example, when we're looking at benefits, we will see that that's been thought through. You understand the context, you understand the need for maybe female-led businesses to be, an initiative for them to be brought on board so that they can acquire some of the workspaces, or for Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people, or people with disabilities. So it will be embedded in that way. And that's how we kind of assess whether something is tokenistic or not. It should be embedded throughout the process.
Brilliant, thank you. So let's go back to Carlos's question, and I apologize, Carlos, for skipping that. Maybe I didn't see it, probably didn't. But Carlos, and I hope I'm asking the right question. It's got 2 thumbs up, so it looks like it's a question that someone else wants to hear the answer to. And Carlos asks, what can you say to planners who far too often request aesthetics changes to a project, usually based on the surplus reasons? This is very important because the client tends to ask the architect to comply with the changes in order to cut down on time and obtain permission sooner, to the detriment of the project.
So this is, I mean, it's a hard one because, well, I suppose on the local authority side, on the planning authority side, there'll be several officers who are involved in reviewing the design. I guess chiefly it's going to fall to a design officer to kind of lead that conversation. So if you're getting feedback from the case officer that there are changes that need to be made, that may have come from an urban design officer. I think that there are several things, not to keep harping on about the same point, but if there is a clear demonstration, I think the way planning policy is set out, planning policy is very logical, and it is set out in order to kind of help guide you through a process. And if you can look at the planning policy, or the heritage statements, or whatever it is, that whatever kind of material consideration would help inform your design. If you look at that and you're able to, again, very clearly set out a justification for why you chose the materials you chose, because it's based on a context, because it won't cause harm to a heritage asset, etc. If you can clearly set that out and show that you looked at different options and this is what you've chosen, I think that really helps to support your case. And you know, I don't know, it may be that a local authority officer's judgment may seem spurious. Equally, you know, everybody's working off the same planning policy, so the case officer and the design officer have an obligation to tell you what justify why in their mind they think that change should be made, and you should ask for that. You should ask for that justification. So I don't think any of it should be seen as being arbitrary. There, of course, there are subjective opinions. Not everything, especially in the design world, can be seen as being objective. There will be different facets to the decisions that you can make. So that's something that, again, it's really about having that conversation. You can request, you know, more feedback specifically from the design officer or whoever the officer is who's reviewing that aspect of the submission. We kind of talked about tools that architects have. There are, and this again depends on the amount of time that you have and the size of the scheme. There are design review panels that are offered more and more through local authorities, and take advantage of those. They come at a cost, but ultimately, if you think that you'd like to have the sort of a review by design peers, then that's and officers really do rely very, very heavily on the outcomes of design review panels. If you want another opinion that the local authority is going to sort of deem as being one that comes from the planning application process, then that's a way to go. But again, I think, you know, if you believe in your design and what you've put forward, then express it to the officer, and they absolutely have to give that their full consideration. So I wouldn't be discouraged.
Again, I totally agree with Karolina's points. You know, I do consultancy work, so I am sometimes on that receiving end of those spurious reasons. And, you know, exactly what you're saying, Karolina, it's about if you know your project well, if you especially know the context, you will be able to ask the urban design officer or the planning officer, you know, give me reasons as to why you feel that there is a conflict. And it tends to happen, I think, for me, mainly on the smaller sites, the infill projects, infill schemes, infill housing projects. And it will be like, you know, usually design, you know, materials. They may dislike the use of, for example, maybe timber in an area where it's predominantly, you know, use of brick. But then you may find that there's a few other properties within the area where they've used timber, and you can use those as precedents as to why you believe that it would, you know, if the argument is that it would be out of character with the context of the area, for example. But most local authorities have policies, specific design policies. So you can always go back to those specific design policies and really just, you know, make the case for why you believe, you know, this works. And, you know, as Karolina said, you know, design can be subjective. So yeah.
Thanks. And following on from there was another question. Graham, and then I'm going to go back to one that Stephen said. So Graham says, follow on from that, is planning policy not interpretive? Does the planner not bring their own opinions to the issue? I think that follows nicely off what you were just saying.
Yeah, yeah, planning policy is interpretive, is my answer to that. Karolina?
It isn't. I mean, some planning policy is pretty black and white. You have to meet a certain threshold. You know, there are numbers. There are certain requirements that need to be met. Some of it is interpretive, certainly around the language that's used in design guidance and design policy. So there are lots of ways to view that. You know, in addition to, but ultimately, an application needs to be interpreted as a whole, and there is a balance. So even if there are, not everyone sees eye to eye on certain aspects of the planning application, the planning officer needs to make a balanced judgment about and assign those things weight. And sometimes some aspects of the application, or areas where there won't be agreement, need to just simply be conceded on, because it is a matter of balance, and there will be other factors that are more important. So yeah, it's true that planning policy is not necessarily doesn't offer all the answers, but again, I think that there's always ample opportunity to sort of make a case around that planning policy language.
Thank you. And we have a question from Stephen, and Stephen asks, what is the local authority's single biggest obstacle that can be removed by architects to improve the chance of positive planning outcomes? Anyone?
Such a tough one. A single, I mean, I think we've been through, I think we've raised a lot of them today. Communication. I think communication is really the biggest one. I think communication would help time. Clarify lots of things for the planning officer, make the planning officer's work much easier. But just being clear in the communication, being selective about the information that's being provided, honing in on what ultimately we need to see and consider. I think that I think is the biggest one, personally.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, communication was what came to mind as well, I think, and being open to receive constructive criticism, I think, as well. I think sometimes on both sides as well, like for the planners, being open to receive, you know, information and to understand the narrative around your design approach. And also on the other side, for the architects to be open to receive sometimes criticism, and then to try and work together collaboratively to work out a solution. So, you know, you identify the issues together and try and work towards a solution. So really communication.
Thanks. I think the two big C's, communication and collaboration. So we're going to kind of finish the session on that note, communication and collaboration. That is kind of two big ways to achieve planning application success. So in closing, I would like to thank Karolina and Nyemu for their expert advice. This has been a non-stop firing conversation, way more fast-paced than I thought it would be. So thank you both for your expertise, and I'll ask you if you want to give a closing statement just now. But I'd also like to thank our audience as well for your really engaging questions. I really appreciate it. And these are some real good content that I can actually take back to the planning group and back to the RIBA. And I will see if we can put together another session with some more people to add their advice. Finally, thank you to our sponsors, Ibstock Brick. Appreciate you sponsoring this session. And the next practice clinic session we have, which is about how to kind of understanding the RBA awards process. That's in this November. But I'd like to kind of sign off with final words from Karolina and Nyemu. Over to you guys.
Okay. I just want to say thank you for the invitation. It's been really interesting to hear the views from architects. And for me, it's like I'm really feeling the frustration that you're going through.
So you opened up your consultancy. When's the consultancy up for?
Yeah, I'm going to be opening up my consultancy and sending out to all of you. No, I really empathize with your challenges. And I think, yeah, we need to open up this discussion. This discussion needs to be opened up wider. And maybe, yes, really start trying to think about ways that we can help kind of ease the burden that we have on planners and resourcing, but also to yourselves to just try and be patient with planners, and keep on trying to have that dialogue with planners when you go through the planning process. But thank you.
Thank you. And Karolina.
Yeah, equally, I'm so pleased to join and feel really privileged to be asked to participate in this by the RIBA. It's lovely to have. I'm very pleased to be a planner having this conversation with you. And it's been a nice exercise for me as well to kind of think from your seat, how what I say to you can be helpful. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Yeah, it's certainly frustrating to hear your frustrations. And I hope that there is kind of a sea change shortly, and that planners are resourced better, and some of the pressures that planners face begin to ease a little bit. We'll find a way. But I'm really pleased.
Public practice.
One of the ways is certainly public practice. Again, another plug for Pinch Yourself, You're a Planner. No, it's been a real pleasure, and so I hope it's been a useful session. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Can I ask you both to stay on the line so we can just wrap up? And for everybody else, thank you for joining us. Look forward to seeing you on our next practice clinics, which is in the first Thursday in November. So thank you very much. It's good to be back in this seat and having these conversations with you. Thank you.